think it's working here. Seemed like it was last time, although it's a little delayed. Dear friends, dear family, and of course, dear seething freaks that stalk me from Twitter, welcome to Marchese Daily, our Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. news show and a little bit of a socio-cultural analysis followed by a panel. The story we are starting with in terms of politics and news is that the ceasefire was broken by Israel and Gaza this weekend, although it was actually already broken on Friday. And, can they grow up a little bit? Can they help themselves? On Friday, it was like a handful of hours before or after some of the news on it. So that'll be our political story. And then our secondary story will be about this Reddit study where somebody aggregated some data and they found that a majority of the Reddit relationship advice comes out to roughly 30%. I got to pull it back up here. It didn't stay. Reddit data. Reddit relationship advice. Almost nailed an intro there. All right, here we go. So there was a significant spike over the span of 15 years, particularly since 2020, 2021, in the advice just being to just break up. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to analyze that quite a bit. So before we begin, Marchese Maxers, loyal Marchese Waffen, Marchese Maxers, you know what to do. Like, reply, join the space for the panel thereafter my monologue, and retweet, engage on YouTube and Rumble as well. We got to get famous here. So let's begin. So Israel broke the ceasefire yesterday, firing upon what they called Hamas strongholds and fighters and the like. And of course, it was under this pretext of, they attacked us first, and they killed 2 of our IDF soldiers. And it's like, really? Every time they just, for no heckin' frickin' reason at all, they're just big fat meanie jerks who would just do some sort of antagonistic, thoroughly unstrategic attack that they know would be met with this full force. Seriously, grow up. Of course, that's not actually a good idea of what happened there. They just fabricate that pretext, as they often do. This is their Hezbollah, as they call it. And also too, notice how this story always goes, where it is, 2 IDF soldiers killed, or 1 or 2 injured or maimed, and what do? Bomb the shit out of them and kill 50 to hundreds to thousands every time. This pattern of disproportionate response really highlights and points to and suggests that there is a deep ideological contempt for others amongst this ethno-religious state. Now, so why would they fabricate this as a pretext for an attack? They have to keep the momentum a little bit going in this war, in this campaign, because this campaign is increasingly unpopular, and it is also winding down and wearing down quite a bit, with a handful of things left unresolved, namely the Palestine-Israel conflict that's been going on since 1948, by the way, shitlib retards. Some of these people are LARPing that this is like a brand new thing. This has been since the very beginning and the very inception of Israel, that this has been a problem with a myriad of conflicts and wars for Israel's integration into the region over the past 60 to 80 years. So there's this deep ideological contempt, and they have to keep the momentum going in this increasingly unpopular war. Not just too long ago, we saw that there was an address at the United Nations, I think. Don't quote me. Don't make fun of me for being low IQ if I get that wrong. Where half or quite a majority of the representatives walked out in the midst of Netanyahu's address. So, with that increasing unpopularity and withering support, to include the support of the United States at this point, because they've really been so arrogant and so brazen as to actually challenge the United States' support for themselves by bombing Qatar, which our relationship with, I'll say, is starting to get pretty weird. I know it sounds gay because that's been their like cope of, well, Qatar funds more education programs in the United States than Israel does, and it's like, okay, well, who can you criticize? Which one gets you deported for criticizing if you're a permanent resident or even a naturalized citizen? Which one gets you canceled on the internet for criticizing? And okay, so funding a handful of Middle Eastern programs and spending a lot of money with that is significantly different than Zionists and Jewish loyalists controlling major, powerful positions in media, news, and so on. So they have withering support, and this war is increasingly unpopular. They even activated the left, something many of us would never think would happen because of their victim hierarchy. Although, of course, it's really not really so activated because this Jews versus Palestine thing for them is a proxy for anti-white hatred because they consider it colonialism and all of that, and they don't understand the difference between white-skinned Jewish people as a different ethnicity race than white-skinned Europeans, but they don't really understand that. They've never understood that, so they just consider this a classic concept of the mean white people versus the mean brown, or versus the nice innocent brown people. Although in this case, I say that sarcastically, although in this case I'm not saying they're innocent or anything, but the wrong here is indeed Israel. So they've activated the left with this unpopular war. They're not getting any support from Europe. Europe, Canada, and the other countries of that coalition have recognized Palestine as a state, a sort of symbolic move. It doesn't actually mean much, but it certainly galvanizes their population towards decreasing support for this campaign. So this has become so unpopular, and the bombing of Qatar has even challenged U.S. support. Now, what is this all pursuant to? This is pursuant to Israeli regional hegemony. All of my friends online, we all know about the Oded Yinon plan and the Clean Break report and all of the like, and essentially there's a coalition of far-right factionalism in Israel that suggests that the solution to their integration into the region is to just take the region. Now, part of this is imperial type stuff, and part of this is just general power and all of that. But one by one, remarkably, what's our problem with it in the United States is that they fucking use us to facilitate this. One by one, even in sequence of these plans, did we, the United States, come in to topple regimes or cause problems as far as multiple factions within one country. This mosaic, as they used in their own terms, of split factions fighting amongst each other to weaken them, to keep them from coming together, to keeping them from amalgamating into states that could actually challenge the the power of Israel. So they want this regional hegemony, and if they let the war either which way, towards Gaza or towards Iran, wither too much, or it sort of fizzle out too much, if they try to do this again later on, it's going to sort of really more so provide a pretext for the rest of the world to significantly challenge that, or maybe even invade or something like that, or impose significant sanctions upon Israel. So to keep the momentum going, they fabricate, they attacked us, so we got to attack them back. And this maintains the momentum of their campaign in the Middle East and towards the later and greater threat that is Iran and its nuclear proliferation. So there is the problem of that, especially with us, with U.S. support for this and U.S. troops stationed there now, which is really weird. How convenient would it be for all of a sudden, if one American soldier dies, we're going to the Middle East yet again and launching a massive campaign. And especially, it's just going to do this foot in the door phenomenon thing of taking us right to Iran. Now, we do have an interest in the region of Iran not nuclearizing because that's been our doctrine for quite a while. We don't want other states to nuclearize. But of course, except with the exception of Israel, of course, who stole our stuff in the Apollo affair. That's how they nuclearized. So they want this regional hegemony. They need to keep this pretext, this momentum going for the casus belli for them to challenge Iran's regime. And for them to challenge the Gaza fighters for them to establish that land as their own, to colonize it. Unfortunate term because that activates anti-white hatred and like. So, on Friday too, they pulled this same shit. They said that they crossed the line, the yellow line, and it's like, what's always like the investigation to that there? Like what probably happened was some fucking kid was like running around and goofing off or something, and they set one foot like over the line. That's usually how this stuff goes. So as far as the story with the pretext for them yesterday, I'm sure there is going to be some emergent story of like it was total crock of shit and they just take it and run with it. It's sort of like in relationships or something. If you have like a crazy girlfriend or something and or especially like some of these Reddit stories of like, yeah, well, he like looked at another woman, so I cheated on him because like that's cheating. This is the type of shit they pulled, except on like a political war scale. Now, they want this regional hegemony. They want to use the United States. They want to keep the United States involved in this way. And I know some of you already know this because they have this strange relationship with us and our want for Iran to not nuclearly proliferate. And that is that we don't want Iran to develop nukes. We don't want, just because it would put them on parity with us and with the rest of the world. It would elevate them to a status of requiring significantly more concessions in terms of negotiating and the like, because they're on parity with us. The mutually assured destruction. So we'd have to take them more seriously. So it would just be best for us. This is just the way that states work for their security. The more power, the better in a way. That's typically regarded as some sort of big fat meanie jerk thing because we're still living in this religion of power is inherently big fat meanie jerk because I'm like literally the boogeyman from the 1940s. But this is how this goes. Israel wants their regime toppled and a puppet regime or something of the like in place of that so that they could control the entire region. This grants them significant oil and the stuff, that story is so gay and normie coded, but there is the oil of the region and all that amongst other things like trade routes and all of that. Now, our problem would be is it's not just enough for us to say, oh, we'll let them handle it and let's focus on China and Russia, because if they do become the regional hegemony, they're going to be the next Russia and China. And we're going to have a much more increasingly complex consortium of states that are at the top of the world that are multipolar powers. We used to be the unipolar thing. We still have this gay cultural thing of thinking that we are the unipolar power of the world, but we're not. And we haven't been since we did this gay little thing of NAFTA and offshoring our manufacturing. So we have our fake GDP that is the highest or one of the highest and all that. But if it's all services, if it's all these intangibles, it's not an accurate reflection of our capability to exercise power or exercise influence across the world or exercise our military might. We don't have manufacturing capacity anymore, and this has enabled Russia and China to outpace us on manufacturing and become on parity with our power. So I'll say there's an element to this too. This is less important, but the Netanyahu government also has to keep this, going, because otherwise, like right after, once this is all done, he's getting indicted and going to jail for like fraud, corruption, and the like. I'll say too on this, the ceasefire deal was like a crock of shit. Some of you might have already known this is a little later news or earlier news, but we're starting off our show here, so we're going to be covering everything. So the deal was sort of a total crock of shit in that sense, because it doesn't guarantee Palestinian statehood in any way. And that's really the crux of this conflict. This conflict cannot be resolved unless, because both sides are unwilling to budge on these certain things that they want and or need. Similar to how we deal with Iran. The Iran problem, the Iran negotiation, is that we are basically asking them to keel over. And Israel asks or demands that Palestine or Palestinians keel over. This conflict, specifically Israel and Palestine, is a conflict of sovereignty, and Israel won't fucking budge because they have their ideological contempt for those who are the Goyim, right? The ones who are not the chosen people, not Jewish ethnically. And Palestine won't negotiate on, because what are they going to do? Just let themselves be subjugated the rest of their lives and like murdered and the like? We have quite a bit of extensive history of Palestinian presence, even in the Israeli state and all that. There's stuff on paper and all that, but as it always goes, you can't just like go by the fucking paper. They say they let them do XYZ thing, and then like what do? They do their like trickery, that bullshit like lawyer-esque type thing of rationalizing these interpretations of what's on paper as an excuse to fuck off and mistreat them and subjugate them. So the crux of the conflict fails to be addressed. So this idea of, oh, you know, Trump, Nobel Peace Prize and all that, this is like some half-ass ceasefire with little to no concessions, not much of anything other than this like bullshit, you know, shaking hand type stuff of exchanging hostages, which also actually presents a problem, a significant risk for Palestine and Hamas, because that was their only leverage. That was the only thing that sort of even gave them any leverage for there to be a negotiation or a seat at the table. So without that, like, you know, what incentive does Israel have, really, other than to just bomb them as soon as they hand over all of the hostages? There's still no guarantee that they have anything. According to this 20-point peace plan. And so they're just going to be sitting ducks waiting to be attacked again. And that poses a significant problem for the peace, for their humanity and the like. And, you know, I'm not like going to be a cringe type, like it's tragic, this war and everything, but I'm certainly not doing this like compassion fagging about all of it. It's tragic. As a Christian, I condemn all of this. This is tragic, and there's tons of loss of life, and of course, the tragic loss of life of the children. But I just don't want it to come off as like I'm like moral fagging about it. So without this redress and with the hostages being exchanged, there's really no incentive for this to become any sort of peace from the Israeli point of view. Similar to how we deal with Iran. You know, the Iran problem is we're asking them not to nuclear proliferate, but without nukes, they have no security against Israel, or at least the capacity to develop a nuke. They have no security against Israel. If Israel has nukes, they can leverage that against Iran. They could leverage the threat of that against Iran to topple their regime and impose upon their sovereignty. So they have to have that. Otherwise, you know, so, and we keep demanding otherwise. We keep saying, well, we don't want you to have a nuke. There's no like middle ground on that. It's sort of binary. Have a nuke or don't have a nuke. Have a state or don't have a state. So I think that's everything I want to say about that part of our story here. Only 20 minutes. I wanted to be a cool guy and be able to go on for an hour, but I'm sure I will do that the more I research and all of that. I'm well read and all that, but I'm not always so well read enough to go on and on for an hour and all that. But maybe since we have multiple parts to our show here, it would be prudent for me to have 20, 30 minutes per segment. So I'll just reiterate that without Palestinian statehood or not statehood, there has to be some sort of out of the box, thinking outside the box solution to that conflict, because this like contempt and this entitlement of the Israelis to the land, this contempt and this mistreatment of them over the past 80 years or so really poses a problem of humanity and poses a problem of sovereignty. They do all this shit. They're always half-assing. They're always Hasbara bullshitting about how the deals went and all of that stuff. And then we've come to find that that's their stupid interpretation of it, or that's them stretching it and playing this game of making it so that they still somehow have an excuse to like subjugate Palestinians and like execute them. They literally, and in some cases on paper, they literally haven't even had rights within the nation, or had rights when they were sort of their own jurisdiction, but simultaneously still answering to Israel, like in the case of when the Palestinian Authority was in charge, or even Hamas in some cases was in charge. And it's interesting too, because over the many years, Hamas is an enemy, but simultaneously the factionalism amongst the Palestinians, the intense argumentation between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas and Hezbollah and the like over how they should do this, how they need to do this deal, how they need to guarantee their sovereignty and all that, the stratagem has produced conflict within. So Israel likes to provoke that by sometimes like endorsing Hamas and sometimes even giving them money with in this ironic twist of fate. So it's just this real sadistic stuff of, we just fucking hate you and we don't want you to be here because, our land from 2,000 years ago. That's crazy, because now all of a sudden, well, if we were to do similar things, or when Russia proposes a similar justification of saying, well, the eastern part of Ukraine would belong to Russia several hundred years ago, all of a sudden it's like, really? Your borders from several hundred years ago? So that's that. We will monitor the situation, monitoring the situation with Marchese. I almost made that the title of this show, and that was kind of funny. Some of my friends, we were doing that a little while ago, especially when I covered this stuff as like breaking news. So that is Israel-Palestine ceasefire. We're going to keep an eye on it. We're going to keep an eye on the U.S. involvement. We do not want the United States involved because it's fucking gay. Can we like grow up past this like gay stuff of like the Middle East and all of that? Realistically, our only interest in the region is maintaining a balance of powers amongst them. And as a matter of fact, although our doctrine is that we don't want nuclear proliferation within Iran, it serves as one of the only checks on Israel that we should be, but how it goes, how the influence goes and all that, pulling the fucking chair out for this guy and letting him speak to our Congress, and it's like a standing ovation after every sentence. This sycophantile Israel worship, Jewish worship religion has to come to an end. And I'll say on an interpersonal level, over this Gaza thing has significantly, unfortunately, has produced a significant increase in anti-Semitism online. And of course, anti-Semitism is like, maybe don't bomb children. But of course, it's led people down the path of investigating all of this stuff as far back as stuff like the USS Liberty, although many of us were kind of, that's like so 10 years ago. Some of us OG red pill anti-Semites, or what they call anti-Semites, I should say, in case I'm already, online enough such that someone's going to clip that and get me in trouble. So this stuff, people are starting to investigate the USS Liberty and the Balfour Declaration and, what even happened all the way back to the Pharisees, which of course they deem as anti-Semitism, has significantly increased. So with this, you will say the spell is breaking and we have to continue to break the spell interpersonally. because the spell is just this emotional stuff about their victimhood, about this religiosity that we were all imbibed with about World War II and the like. And we all know there's a lot more to that story than, and then for no freaking reason, the big fat meaty boogeyman with one testicle, these perverted myths, just wanted to be a freaking coping seething guy who's freaking mad that he didn't go to art school and blamed the freaking Jews. Like, really? Can we like grow up? We all need to grow up past this. We all need to understand politics and collective unconsciouses are a little bit more sophisticated than that, especially when it comes to statecraft and statehood. So break the spell, and there's this spell of the risk of interpersonal group shame, ostracization, and all that. But just speak to it. Just speak to it articulately, and just like, really, you'd be surprised how many people are curious and would like to be red-pilled on this stuff, not for the sake of being red-pilled, but they just hear about this stuff in the news. They're uninformed. We were all kind of uninformed because, I don't know, in high school, I don't remember them going over this Palestine part, which is kind of ironic because that's kind of the crux of the past 80 years of issues in the Middle East. Kind of like the start of all the problems in the Middle East, to be honest. That's kind of what the Middle East's Islamic problem with us is. And some of you based in, level 4,000, 5,000 anti-Semites know that there's a lot of the expression of even why there would be terrorist attacks, and that's because of our enablement of, it's been expressed by, I want to say bin Laden, or who was the other one? Low IQ moment. I'm not good with details. I'm much better with, sort of like the math way of thinking of things, the formulas, just, knowing the formulas as opposed to the details of the specific problem. But there's been expression of one of the reasons that there's anti-American sentiment in the Middle East essentially is because of our enablement and support and bootlicking for Israel. So all that's to say that interpersonally, get used to the idea of talking about this, and even if you're with shitlibs or conservatard types who will, shame you into oblivion, you'd be surprised how many people just sort of exist politically outside of the internet and aren't so sycophantile about that. And just like there's normies who are, will still see that if you say, I'm not sure I believe that number from the 1940s, but when you talk about Israeli behavior and all that, it leads them to that place. When you talk about Talmudic Judaism and all that stuff, it leads them to that place. And it at least provokes a sense of curiosity or a sort of fun thing for people to feel like, oh, hang on, wait a minute, there's more to this. I didn't know that. That's kind of interesting. That changes my perspective. And that can actually be kind of fun for people at times. And the shame and all of that stuff, the job loss type risk and all of that, that's, for the most part over. People are political now. People are used to seeing people on the internet now, and so long as you're just not being like a seething freak about it, you'll be okay. You'll be fine. This like emotional just think about it. Like what? So because 80 years ago, this story that we don't know all the details to, or that we can't trust all the details are fully verified about, because of that, they get to just like never be free, be totally free or excused from any criticism as a people and all of that. Like even some of the stuff, it's anti-Semitic to say Jews control the media or something like that. What exactly about that necessarily implies that you have an irrational hatred of that collective of people strictly on the basis of the genetic makeup that is Semitic or Jewish or Ashkenazi for that matter? You'll even like play with grok. I had a friend who was like playing with grok about it. It's like, what's anti-Semitic about that? Well, it echoes anti-Semitism, which what does that mean? That means, oh, well, it sounds anti-Semitic. Okay, well, what about that necessarily makes it sound that way? Well, because it sounds that way. So, and not to, it sounds like gay and fucking weird to argue with an AI or something, but that just highlights it's a byproduct of the internet and its programming and the like. So, that highlights or points you to what the actual sort of stuff falls upon. And it just falls upon this axiom of, well, because it's mean and you risk, falsely judging somebody and all of that. But it's like, okay, well, what's meaner, judging somebody or our nation's sovereignty totally subverted? and 18 to 20 something year olds dying in the Middle East all throughout the 2000s because of a gay pretext of fake Islamic terrorism that in no way would actually fully threaten the United States because we're just totally protected by two massive oceans. So anyway, let me not go too long on about that. I'm not really as good on the news and the politics as I am on the psychoanalysis type stuff. So let's see, we're 30 minutes in. We got quite a handful of people on the X live broadcast. Let me check on my space here, see if anybody's joined in. Still no. What's going on, guys? What's the matter? Are you guys all babies? Do you babies not get up at 7-ish in the morning Eastern time? I want to have a panel on here. I want to get some ideas because I can go on for a while, but after like an hour, I run out of ideas. So I appreciate when my friends jump in on the spaces. So watch the live. Actually, we got to boost the engagement of that. I think the systems are more receptive to when the lives go. I think they want those to circulate more because they're more engaging and keep people on the platform more probably. So do that and then jump in on the panel afterwards. But also keep it open. Keep the Rumble, keep the YouTube, keep the X live broadcast and the space open. You got a Marchese Max, all right? Road to 10K, road to 1 million, road to 2 billion, road to Marchese Media Company that will challenge all of mainstream media. I will get all of the money for that from you guys, by the way. You guys got to pay me. Anyway, that's just kidding. So there was also this sort of interesting find. There was a Reddit user, let's see, what was his name? It doesn't say in this tweet here, but this guy composed a study or aggregated some data analysis of 1.16 million comments on r/relationship advice, which has a total of 5 million posts, 52 million comments. And we find that since 2019, 2020, well, actually, it caves down until about 2021. And then from 2021 to currently, the percentage of advice essentially amounting to end relationship, break up, divorce, or cut contact skyrockets from roughly 37-ish% all the way up to 45-ish%. And then since 2010, it goes from 32% to 47%. I don't know if I can say skyrockets there. It kind of looks like I'm doing the low IQ meme of like colors and graphs, and comparative to the other lines, it is significantly higher, but I don't know if that necessarily implies a significant trend. But nevertheless, let's talk about what that trend. I will say that trend is symptomatic of this broad scale collective unconscious combination of hedonism in the form of avoidance of displeasure and discomfort, and a hedonism in the form of ego. Let me write that down, make sure I don't forget. Hedonism, avoidance of displeasure, work hedonism in the form of ego. Title. All right. So, and I've been reading about this. I'm glad I sort of arrived at this conclusion before I read all of this stuff. It makes you feel like you're on the right path. So I've been reading about the death of the West. I know level 1 racist book, The Death of the West, and all of that. But Pat Buchanan mentioned that since the 1960s or so, there's been this cultural shift. He attributes it to communism, and it's like, okay, who came up with communism? There's this broad cultural shift in collective unconscious to evaluation of hedonism, which is pleasure above all else, and the avoidance of displeasure, or displeasure overall, is like the peak evil. Let me get a sip of my drink. Actually, I don't want to. There's something about it that gives details away about me in this drink, so I don't want to sip it on camera. So I'm gonna have to hold out here. So now we're used to, the mass media and communists told us this, but let's speak to why it sticks, right? What button does that push when we have things like hedonism? Why are people so willing and easily transmuted or form themselves their value system from Christ, from Christianity, from transcendence, from purpose, from fulfillment to hedonism. Well, and I know I've gone over this a million times for some of you guys, but that is that our survival instincts, our brain evolved a system to encourage behaviors pursuant to our survival and reproduction and discourage behaviors otherwise. Lizard brain, as it's sometimes called, I use the term lizard brain, brainstem in some examples, that essentially will secrete pleasure when you do things pursuant to your survival. Some simplistic versions of that, that's why sex feels good and all of that. That's why it feels good to eat food, because it is intaking fuel that you need to maintain your homeostasis and maintain your organs and all that stuff and get yourself doing things. And the avoidance of displeasure. The most common and frequent and preeminent example of this is the dichotomy between the eating and the gym and all of that stuff and, being fat. Our brain encourages us to fatten up and to be lazy, because if we spend more energy than we take in, eventually we're going to run out and we die. So we receive pleasure for taking in energy and not spending it. This is why people go, oh, I just freaking love sleep, man. Oh, sleep is my favorite thing in the world. I love taking naps. I love to take naps. And I make fun of that because it is what you behave like if you're a fucking baby. If you're a single-celled organism, fucking insentient retard baby. And I'll get into that well throughout the show. So that is the button that's pushed. And of course, we're displeased when we pursue energy or when we don't eat. And then this takes another form of the foods that are highly rewarding calorically or provide some kind of easy facilitation of a mechanism. They're highly rewarding. Example is fat is 9 calories per gram, so necessarily our body responds to it well with pleasure because it is much more pursuant to that survival intake of food. And then things like sugar please us because sugar very easily sucrose very easily turns over to glucose, and we can it's this optimization of we don't even have to spend all that much energy converting it into energy. It's like a low investment. So all that said, this is an example of how buttons are pushed to be hedonistic. So how does this apply to this end relationship stuff? This extends to any output of energy interpersonally, emotionally, relationally, and the like. And so what you have is people wanting this cop-out, this excuse to end relationships very quickly and easily over the slightest discomfort. Because the slightest discomfort doesn't feel goodsy to them, and they don't understand a relationship's value outside of the pleasure of somebody, loving you and somebody giving you hugs and kisses and somebody letting you put your pee-pee in them, or, somebody putting their pee-pee in you if you're a woman. They don't understand relationships outside. They don't understand life at all outside of this. They don't understand transcendence, free will, agency. The gift that is being a human, that you can break free from this animalistic instinct. Let me check time here. And so when the relationship doesn't provide that, they don't see the point of that. And they also take it to this neurotic, histrionic level of ultimately there's this false rationale or theory that your relationship's supposed to be 24/7 pleasant. And not even just 24/7 pleasant, but 24/7 drug-like pleasant that you feel when you first meet somebody, the novelty stimulus and the new stimulus of meeting somebody and the new stimulus of the affection, that initial stage of the bonding and the hormones secreting to make you bond more strongly and make you feel excitement and all of that pursuant to that bonding. So they think it's supposed to be this drug-like experience 24/7. And sometimes people's perception of this is like the woman problem with relationships, right? We are all familiar with the story, the classic fable of women liking a guy who's a freaking jerk and all that. It's because there's inherent excitement that they think a relationship's supposed to have in the extremum of feelings. And those types of guys who are jerks, when they express affection, since it's sort of few and far between, or it's neutralized by extreme disaffection through like abuse or whatever, or being a jerk. They sort of feel this spike back and forth, and just having that spike, the existence of that spike, feels like excitement, which they then falsely conclude, well, that must mean that we're really passionate about each other, and this is how the relationship is supposed to go. But overall, a relationship, happiness, fulfillment, and all of that, if you think about it, what that actually entails is peace. Happiness, fulfillment is peace. Your relationship brings you peace. And peace doesn't mean constant comfort. It doesn't mean somebody who just subordinates themselves to you endlessly and they're like a on-demand dog, at the snap of your fingers, but you're at peace. You don't feel threatened, and your relationship is not some sort of spike of neurons. So there's this general trend of, well, just ended over every ridiculous little thing is a byproduct of this idea that the relationship's supposed to be constant pleasure at all times, and life's supposed to be that way. And they infer that, well, if there's so many people in the world, you can just end the relationship and you could find this perfect fairy tale. This is also just like low IQ stuff of like seeing movies. Movies spike their dopamine when they watch these stories work out in this very perfect way, the movie scene, and they think that every second is supposed to be like that as well. So when it's not, it must be wrong. It must not be a authentic relationship. And all of that. So I think secondarily, in a more complex way, the hedonism is a form of this egotistical stuff of, oh, well, I'm tough, or, oh, well, I have this value. A lot of times with this dating discourse type stuff, these characters also have this problem of low self-esteem, and they rely on the approval of the opposite sex to have self-esteem. Of course, that's not self-esteem. That's fake self-esteem. And so one of the ways that they pathologize this is that they do this meme of when they fear, right? Because when a relationship is having its struggle and all that, what does it sometimes feel like? It feels like rejection, and that threatens them. That threatens their sense of self and their ego and all of that, because that forces them, that pain of an insult to their identity. So rather than face that and all of that, they will play this game of protecting themselves. And so when the relationship feels like it is a threatening that or feeling like rejection, they play this game of, well, reject them before they really fully reject me. And that is how you have stuff like, just end the relationship, just, end it and all of that. And so it's reject them before they reject me. And of course, what's the problem with this? Well, then you're just endlessly linearizing this, and you're never really finding the relationship, and you're never really nourishing the spiritual fulfillment and soul part of a relationship, the part of a relationship that is your actual fulfillment. And it's putting on this like act where it is lose my train of thought here, huh? Might have to see if we have a panel on just to get my thoughts going. Still nobody's here, guys. You guys suck. That's all right. We got the live viewers, live viewers. So I'll wrap that up with saying that the pathology also comes with, and I should tweet about this later. Look out for my tweet about this later when I have a moment to more so write it out. And I forgot to copy my notes over from my draft about it. And it's Twitter syncs the drafts now, except they don't. So thanks, I guess. Let me open another window of Twitter. Maybe it will sync. Let's bet on this, just so that I can keep my train of thought going. There's a conclusion to that part about the pathology of reject them before they reject me. I already said what's wrong about it. And there's like this way that people do this thing of they need to live themselves. They need to exercise this through others, and that's how you have the advice to it too. They exercise this, reject them before they reject me, through others as well, to further bolster their sense of like cocky tough guy stuff, of this endless need for approval of the opposite sex. And when you don't get it, well, I'm going to reject them before they reject me, so that I don't have to face any sort of sensation of rejection there. So next time I have something like that, I definitely got to get up a little earlier to copy that over. I wanted to give you a little bit better details about the Israel ceasefire and all of that. So that's going to be our show for today. I think a little short. I wanted to get to an hour, but that is okay. Let me actually look on my Twitter here. I have 20 plus notifications here, and I didn't tweet all that much this morning or overnight. So let's just see if anyone's commenting. No, this is just my friends. Too much of all that. All right. So sorry to keep you waiting. I'll come back at you with a stronger analysis of that Reddit stuff later on. That's going to be our show today. Remember to like, share, Marchese Max, and all of that. If you would like coaching/based therapy, and I say based therapy because I deploy therapeutic techniques, but just so you know, I'm not fully licensed yet and all of that stuff. But what happened to not trusting the institutions, right? I mean, some of these textbooks, what are the sentences of the textbook even? What are they even telling you how to do? It'll say stuff like, as a counselor, it's important to make sure you're conscious of your client's cultural identity. Like, really? We're still saying stuff like that? What the fuck does that even mean? It's such like a Reddit midwit sentence anyway. So if you would like coaching or base therapy on the myriad of topics to include finding your fulfillment, some stuff like how to get yourself to go into the gym, how to get married, and all of that, you can go to marchesemethods.com and book me for the service. We have one-on-one, one-time sessions available for $50, but if you do 4 in advance, it comes out to $120, which is $30 per session. Significantly cheaper, by the way, than some of these dorks who aren't even that big of names. Based a friend, but I've seen some guys who charge like $200 for an hour just because they have like 5,000 to 20,000 followers. Like, okay, I could never just bring myself to do that. So if you don't want to invest yourself fully in that way, I also have a Discord at which you could pay $5 a month, and you could text me, message me anytime for advice on all of these things. And sometimes if we get really into it, that could amount to a voice chat at no additional charge to all of that. And I think that is all my shilling and all of that. So thanks for tuning in. Marchese Daily, live on the air Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much, and I will see you tomorrow.